Hey guys, tonight we're exploring a story that everyone in history should know. The story is The Tudor Love Rules That Feel Wrong. Today you get comfortable, take a moment, like the video, and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see who's joining us from around the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The Tudor Love Rules That Feel Wrong. Today, imagine waking before sunrise in Tudor England. The room is quiet. For a few moments, the world outside seems to have disappeared. There is only the faint sound of wind moving around the timber walls, the soft creak of a floorboard somewhere below, and the gentle crackle of a fire that someone has already begun to prepare. The air is cool. The darkness has not completely lifted. Beyond the small window, the first light is beginning to touch the roofs of the houses. Somewhere in the distance, a church bell may soon call people toward another day. You remain still for a moment. You are not thinking about kings or battles. You are not standing inside a grand palace. You are simply wondering about someone. Perhaps you saw them yesterday. Perhaps you spoke with them only briefly. Perhaps you have been waiting for a letter. And perhaps, in this quiet Tudor morning, you are beginning to understand that something has changed inside you. You have begun to care for another person. Today, that might feel like the beginning of a private story. In Tudor England, it was rarely quite so private. Love could begin quietly, inside the heart of one person. But marriage belonged to families, churches, communities, property, reputation, and tradition. A young man could look across a crowded room and feel drawn toward someone. A young woman could hear a familiar voice and find herself waiting for it. Two people could begin to imagine a future together. But before that future could become real, there were many things to consider. Who were their families? Could they support a household? Did their parents approve? Was there property involved? Were there religious obstacles? Had either person already made a promise to someone else? And perhaps most importantly, what exactly did the two people mean when they said they intended to marry? The answer was not always as simple as it sounds, because in Tudor England, words could carry an unusual weight. A promise made between two people might later become the center of a legal dispute. A conversation remembered years later could suddenly matter. A letter could become evidence. A witness could be asked what had been said. And something that began as a private moment between two people could eventually be examined by a church court. To understand why, we need to step slowly backward into the world in which these people lived. The Tudor period began in 1485, when Henry VII came to the throne after the Battle of Bosworth. It continued through the reigns of Henry VIII, Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I, ending in 1603 with Elizabeth's death. Almost everything about England changed during those years. Religion changed. Politics changed. The relationship between the crown and the church changed. England's place in Europe changed. The way people understood authority changed. Yet one thing remained remarkably steady. People still wanted companionship. They still married. They still had children. They still worried about whether a person they loved would return their feelings. They still hoped that a marriage might bring happiness. And they still discovered that affection alone did not always decide the future. Picture yourself walking through a Tudor town now. The morning has finally arrived. The streets are damp. The air carries the smell of smoke from household fires. A horse passes slowly along the road. Its hooves make a dull sound against the earth. Nearby, a shopkeeper is preparing to open for the day. A baker is working with flour. People are beginning to move toward their daily work. There are no modern signs telling you where to go, no glowing screens, no instant messages, no cars moving quickly through the streets. News travels through voices, letters, messengers, and personal encounters. And romance travels in much the same way. You might meet someone because your families know each other. You might meet through work. You might meet at church. You might become familiar with someone at a market or gathering. You might know a person for years before realizing that your feelings have changed. Courtship was not necessarily a separate stage of life that looked exactly like modern dating. It was woven into ordinary society. People met one another while living ordinary lives. They worked together. They visited one another's households. They attended religious services. They participated in community life. And gradually, sometimes almost unnoticed, affection could grow. But there was a difference between liking someone and being able to marry them. A Tudor person might love someone who was considered unsuitable. The families might object. The person might have too little money. The social difference might be too large. There might already be another arrangement. Or the family might simply believe that a different marriage would be better. For wealthy families, marriage could involve estates, inheritance, political relationships, and financial arrangements. A marriage could connect two families. It could bring land together. It could protect an inheritance. It could strengthen a family's social position. For ordinary people, the calculations were usually smaller, but they were still practical. A household needed income. A husband and wife needed somewhere to live. Food had to be purchased or produced. Clothing had to be made or repaired. Tools were needed. Children might eventually require support. Marriage was therefore an emotional decision, but it was also an economic one. This is one of the first things that can feel strange when we look at Tudor relationships through modern eyes. Today, many people imagine marriage as beginning with a simple question. Do these two people love each other? In Tudor England, the question could be much larger. Can these two people build a household? Will their families support the match? What property will change hands? What obligations will be created? What will happen to the children? What will happen if one person dies? And of course, do the two people actually want each other? That last question still mattered. It is important not to imagine Tudor people as individuals who simply accepted whatever marriage their families arranged. They did not all behave that way. Young people could resist. They could argue. They could refuse. They could form attachments without their family's permission. Some couples wanted to marry despite opposition. Others eventually persuaded their families. Some did not. The past was not a world without personal choice. It was a world in which personal choice existed within stronger social boundaries, and those boundaries could be difficult to cross. Imagine a young woman living with her parents. She has met a young man. He is kind to her. She enjoys speaking with him. Perhaps he has visited the household several times. Her parents know him. At first, nobody thinks much about it. But then, the visits become more frequent. A glance lasts a little longer. A conversation continues after everyone else has left the room. A letter arrives. A small gift is given. Nothing seems dramatic. Yet slowly, the relationship becomes visible. And once it becomes visible, other people begin to have opinions. Her mother may wonder what his intentions are. Her father may ask whether he can support a household. A relative may know his family. A neighbor may already have heard something. The young woman may still feel that the relationship belongs to her. But the people around her may disagree. They may believe that her future is partly their concern. This was especially true because marriage could affect the entire family. A daughter did not simply leave one household and enter another. Depending on her circumstances, marriage could affect property, alliances, inheritance, Inulormtreber, and family relationships. For a wealthy family, the consequences could be enormous. For a modest family, the consequences might simply involve whether there were enough resources to establish a new household. Either way, marriage was rarely viewed as an isolated romantic event. It was a social event, and society wanted to know when it was happening. This is where one of the most interesting Tudor customs appears: the reading of marriage banns. Before a marriage could take place according to the normal church process, bans could be announced publicly. The intention was to allow anyone who knew of a legitimate obstacle to speak. Imagine standing in a parish church. The building is cool. The stone floor holds the chill of the morning. Light enters through the windows. People stand or sit quietly. The priest announces that two people intend to marry. Their names are spoken aloud. Everyone hears them. The couple may already know that they want to marry. Their families may already be preparing. But now the intention becomes public. For 3 Sundays or holy days, the bans could be proclaimed. Anyone with a genuine reason to object could raise it. Perhaps one person was already married. Perhaps there was a prohibited degree of relationship. Perhaps some other canonical obstacle existed. The announcement was therefore more than a ceremony. It was a form of public checking. The community was being given an opportunity to say, in effect, that something was wrong if something really was wrong. Today, the idea can feel remarkably intrusive. Imagine having your future marriage announced to the entire congregation before you could simply move forward with it. But to Tudor society, this made sense. Marriage affected more than 2 people. It affected families, children, property, inheritance, religious life. And so the community had a reason to be involved. This same principle appears in the way Tudor people understood reputation. Your reputation belonged partly to you, but it also belonged to the community's understanding of you. People knew who came from respectable families. They knew who was considered reliable. They knew who had been involved in disputes. They knew who had broken promises. They knew who was considered honest. And they noticed relationships. This does not mean that every Tudor village was constantly spying on every household. People had work to do. Fields needed attention. Animals needed feeding. Markets needed visiting. Meals needed preparing. Children needed care. There was plenty of ordinary life. But in a small community, complete privacy was difficult. A person could be noticed simply because the same people encountered one another every day. A young man visiting the same household repeatedly might become familiar. A young woman spending time with someone might become a subject of conversation. A pregnancy could make a private relationship public. And when that happened, reputation suddenly mattered. For women, this could be especially serious. Tudor society placed strong expectations upon female chastity. A respectable unmarried woman was expected to avoid sexual relations. A married woman was expected to remain faithful to her husband. The same religious teachings applied to men in principle, but society did not always judge men and women equally. This inequality is one of the clearest places where Tudor romantic life feels wrong to modern eyes. Men could sometimes escape consequences that women could not. A man's sexual behavior might damage his reputation, but a woman's sexual reputation could affect her marriage prospects, her family's honor, and the perceived legitimacy of her children. The burden was unequal, and it was connected to a deeper concern: inheritance. In a society where property could pass from parents to children, knowing who belonged to which family mattered. For noble families, this could become a matter of land and succession. For ordinary families, it could still affect the standing and future of children. A child born outside marriage could face social disadvantages. The mother might face criticism. The father might deny responsibility. Families might pressure the couple to marry. Sometimes the matter could reach a church court. The consequences were therefore not simply emotional. They could become economic and social. Yet even here, Tudor society was not entirely rigid. People sometimes tried to repair relationships. A couple might marry after a pregnancy. Families could intervene. A man might acknowledge responsibility. A woman might claim that he had promised to marry her. And this brings us back to the extraordinary importance of promises. Because Tudor people had more than one kind of marriage-related promise, there could be a promise to marry in the future. There could be words expressing present consent to marriage. The distinction could be crucial. Imagine two people speaking privately. They promise that they will marry. They may mean it sincerely. At that moment, they are thinking about the future. But later, something changes. A family objects. Money becomes a problem. Another marriage is proposed. One person decides to withdraw. Now the original promise becomes important. Did they truly promise? What exactly did they say? When did they say it? Who heard them? Were there witnesses? Were there letters? Did the couple behave afterward as if they were already married? These were not merely romantic questions. They could become legal questions. Church courts in England dealt with disputes involving marriage and sexual morality. People could bring claims. They could deny accusations. Witnesses could give testimony. And the resulting records provide historians with some of the most revealing glimpses into ordinary Tudor relationships. They show that people did not always obey the rules. They also show that people understood the rules well enough to argue about them. A young woman might know that a promise of marriage gave her a claim. A man might know that denying such a promise could protect him from an unwanted marriage. A family might know that a disputed relationship could damage their reputation. Everyone understood that words mattered. And perhaps this is where the Tudor world begins to feel both strange and familiar at the same time. The rules were different. But people still argued about love. They still remembered conversations. They still insisted that someone had promised something. They still felt betrayed when promises were broken. They still hoped that affection would become commitment. The emotions were familiar. The framework around them was different. Now imagine that you are the young person waiting for a letter. The evening has come. The daylight has disappeared. Inside the house, the fire is low. There is little reason to waste candlelight. The room is quiet, except for the occasional sound of movement. You think about what was said yesterday. You remember the exact expression on the other person's face. You wonder whether the promise was serious. Tomorrow, perhaps, there will be an answer. But tonight, there is only waiting, and waiting was a natural part of Tudor courtship. There were no instant messages, no telephone calls, no quick way to know whether a person had received your words. Letters depended upon messengers. Messengers depended upon roads. Roads depended upon weather, and weather could delay everything. A letter might take days to reach its destination, sometimes longer. If the recipient was away, it might take even more time. This slow communication created a particular rhythm to relationships. You could not simply ask a question and expect an immediate response. You had to wait. Perhaps you continued with your daily work. Perhaps you tried not to think about it. But the unanswered question remained somewhere in your mind. Then, one morning, footsteps might approach the door. A messenger might have arrived. Someone might hand you a folded letter. And suddenly, the waiting would end. The physical letter itself could become precious. Paper was not something everyone treated casually. Writing required materials. Literacy was not universal. Many ordinary people could not read or write. Letters could therefore carry a special significance. For those who could use them, they offered a private space for affection. A person could explain feelings, ask questions, offer reassurance, discuss marriage, express disappointment. The surviving letters of Tudor people show that emotional language could be surprisingly personal. The people of the 16th century were not emotionally distant simply because they lived hundreds of years ago. They could miss one another. They could worry. They could express affection. They could feel uncertainty. They could become impatient. They could be deeply attached. The difference was not the existence of emotion. It was the society surrounding that emotion. And as we move deeper into that society, another important rule begins to appear. A courtship did not necessarily belong entirely to the couple. The family could have a voice, sometimes a very strong voice. A young person's parents could encourage a match. They could discourage one. They could negotiate financial arrangements. They could suggest another partner. And in wealthy families, these negotiations could become elaborate. Property might be discussed. Dowries might be considered. Inheritance might be protected. The family's long-term interests could shape the choice. For a noble family, the marriage of one child could affect the position of the entire household. A daughter might marry into another powerful family. A son might marry someone whose family controlled important estates. Marriage could strengthen alliances. It could protect property. It could create new political relationships. This is why royal and aristocratic marriages often look so different from the romances we imagine today. A king could marry for diplomatic reasons. A princess could be promised to a foreign prince. A noblewoman could be matched with a man because the union benefited two families. And yet, even within these arrangements, personal feelings could exist. A practical marriage did not automatically mean an emotionless marriage. People could grow fond of one another. They could develop companionship. They could develop genuine love. The beginning of a marriage did not always determine everything that happened afterward. This is important because modern people sometimes imagine a simple opposition. Arranged marriage means no love. Love marriage means freedom. History is rarely that simple. A marriage could begin with family negotiation and later become affectionate. A couple could choose one another and still struggle. A marriage could be practical and happy. A marriage could be romantic and unhappy. Human relationships have always been complicated. The Tudor period was no exception. And yet the influence of family could be powerful enough to make courtship feel almost like a negotiation. Imagine being a young man who wants to marry. You have affection for someone, but you do not yet have enough money to establish a household. Your parents may tell you to wait. Perhaps you need to complete an apprenticeship. Perhaps you need to establish yourself in a trade. Perhaps you need to inherit property. Perhaps the family of the woman you hope to marry expects financial security. You may have strong feelings. But feelings do not build a roof. They do not buy food. They do not provide tools. They do not pay rent. In a society where households depended heavily on labor and resources, economic readiness mattered. This is one reason marriage ages varied considerably. The law allowed marriage at very young ages under canon law, 12 for girls, 14 for boys. But these were legal minimum ages, not typical ages of marriage for the whole population. Many people married later. They needed the means to establish households. Economic independence took time. Work came first. Apprenticeships could last years. A young person might remain in a parental household while learning a trade. Marriage could wait until the practical conditions were right. Among wealthy families, however, different calculations could apply. Children could be married or promised at younger ages because property and political relationships mattered. Yet even then, marriage arrangements could involve separate questions about when a couple would begin living together or when a marriage would be consummated. The Tudor world therefore contained many different timelines. There was no single age at which romance began. No single age at which marriage happened. No single path from courtship to household. Every family occupied its own place within the larger structure. And as the day fades again, you begin to see something important. The Tudor rules of love were not really rules about love alone. They were rules about society. They were ways of organizing households, ways of protecting property, ways of defining legitimate children, ways of maintaining religious order, ways of preserving family reputation. Love existed inside all of that, and sometimes it managed to slip beyond it. A young couple could find a quiet moment. They could speak softly. They could imagine a future that belonged to them. For a little while, the outside world might disappear, but sooner or later, the world would return. The family would ask questions. The church would have its requirements. The community would notice, and the couple would have to decide what they were willing to risk. That is where our journey through Tudor love begins to become more intimate. Because the most interesting stories are not always about kings and queens. They are about ordinary people standing at the edge of adulthood, trying to understand whether affection can become a life together. And as the night settles over the Tudor town, one such young couple is about to discover that the most important question is not simply whether they love one another. It is whether their words have already created a promise that the rest of the world can recognize. And tomorrow, when the first light returns through the small window, that question will begin to follow them. The morning arrives quietly. A pale light settles over the roofs of the Tudor town, touching the upper edges of chimneys before reaching the narrow streets below. Inside the small house, the fire has burned low. The young man is awake. So is the young woman. Neither knows exactly what the other is thinking, yet both understand that something has changed. The words spoken between them yesterday no longer feel like ordinary words. They have begun to carry weight. In the Tudor world, a promise to marry could be more than a romantic expression. It could become something that others remembered, something that could later be discussed before a church court. Something that might determine whether a relationship was understood as courtship, engagement, or marriage. And so the young couple now face a quiet uncertainty. Did they merely promise to marry someday? Or had they said something that could be understood as marriage itself? To a modern person, the distinction may sound unnecessarily complicated, but in the 16th century, the words mattered. The church recognized marriage through consent, and the exact form and timing of that consent could have legal consequences. A promise about the future was not exactly the same as an immediate declaration that the marriage existed. The difference could seem small when two people were speaking privately. Later, it could become enormous. Imagine sitting across from someone you care about. There is no lawyer, no official document, no recording of the conversation, only two people and their memories. You say that you will marry. Perhaps you mean it completely. The other person believes you. Years later, if the relationship breaks apart, how can anyone prove what happened? This was one reason witnesses mattered. Friends could remember conversations. Relatives could know about promises. A priest might have been told. Letters might exist. And sometimes, a couple's later behavior could become part of the story. This was a world in which memory could become evidence. The ordinary human act of making a promise could eventually enter the machinery of law. But before that happened, most courtships remained much quieter. A young woman might spend time with a man she liked. Her family might know. His family might know. Perhaps nobody objected. Perhaps everyone expected that the relationship would eventually lead to marriage. There might be no dramatic announcement. Life simply moved forward. And this slow movement is important. Tudor courtship was often gradual. The modern idea of dating can suggest a sequence of formal meetings, but Tudor relationships could grow through repeated contact. People saw each other while working. They met through relatives. They attended church. They visited neighboring households. They participated in festivals and community gatherings. They became familiar. Familiarity could create affection. Affection could create intention. Intention could create promises. And eventually, perhaps, marriage. The process was not always neat. Sometimes the relationship ended somewhere along the way. Perhaps the families objected. Perhaps the young man could not establish himself financially. Perhaps another opportunity appeared. Perhaps one person simply changed their mind. And this was where the difference between modern expectations and Tudor realities could become uncomfortable. A person could be expected to think not only about whom they loved, but about whether the relationship made sense within the structure of society. Imagine that the young woman from yesterday has told her mother about the man she likes. Her mother listens. She does not immediately reject the idea. Instead, she asks questions. Who is his father? What work does he do? Where does his family live? Does he have a good reputation? Can he support a household? Does he have property? Is he known to be honest? These questions may sound practical rather than romantic, but they reveal something important. For a Tudor family, marriage could be a form of security. A good marriage might protect a daughter's future. A poor marriage might place her in difficulty. Parents, therefore, had reasons to be cautious. They were not necessarily trying to destroy their daughter's happiness. They might believe that they were protecting it. The same could be true for sons. A father might worry that his son was not ready to marry. A young man might want to marry immediately. His father might tell him to wait until he had learned his trade. The son might not appreciate the advice. He might feel that his love was being treated as a financial calculation. Yet from the father's perspective, the calculation could be reasonable. A household could not survive on affection alone. There was another reason families cared so deeply about marriage. Marriage connected generations. Children were expected to continue family lines. Property could pass from one generation to another. Names could continue. Businesses could continue. Land could remain within a family. A marriage, therefore, created consequences that might last for decades. For noble families, the consequences could last for centuries. And this is where the Tudor world becomes especially fascinating. Because while ordinary people were quietly deciding whom to marry, the royal family was doing something similar on a much larger scale. The marriages of kings and queens could affect entire countries. Henry VII's marriage to Elizabeth of York helped unite the houses of Lancaster and York after the Wars of the Roses. Their marriage was not simply a private romance. It carried political meaning. Their children became part of a new Tudor dynasty. The marriage helped give the new royal family a sense of legitimacy. For the people living below the royal court, this was distant history. But the principle was familiar. Marriage could strengthen a family. The difference was only the size of the consequences. For an ordinary household, a marriage might affect a farm or workshop. For a royal family, it could affect a kingdom. And perhaps that is why Tudor attitudes toward marriage can seem so serious. Marriage was not treated as something temporary. It was supposed to be lasting. The religious understanding of marriage emphasized permanence. A husband and wife were expected to remain together. Divorce, in the modern sense of simply ending a marriage and marrying someone else, was not available as an ordinary option. This matters enormously when thinking about Tudor love. Imagine discovering after several years of marriage that you and your spouse no longer love one another. Today, depending on the country and circumstances, divorce may be possible. In Tudor England, the situation was very different. Marriage was intended to be permanent. A person could seek an annulment in certain circumstances. But an annulment was not simply a divorce. It meant that the marriage was considered invalid for a specific reason. The distinction was important. A marriage might be challenged because of prohibited kinship. A prior marriage might make a later union invalid. Certain forms of incapacity could matter. The rules were complicated. But the central principle remained. Marriage was not supposed to be something a person could simply end because they had fallen out of love. This could make romantic decisions before marriage feel even more serious. If marriage was intended to last for life, choosing a partner was not a small decision. A family might therefore feel justified in asking many questions. A young person might feel nervous about choosing. A widow might think carefully before marrying again. And a couple might understand that once they entered marriage, there was no easy path back. This helps explain why Tudor society placed so much importance on preparation and consent. The decision mattered. The consequences were long. And because marriage was permanent in principle, people needed to know whether the couple were truly able to marry. That brings us back to the church. The parish church was at the center of everyday Tudor life. People were baptized there. They attended worship there. They married there. They were buried through the church. The church calendar shaped the rhythm of the year. Sundays were different from ordinary working days. Religious festivals brought communities together. For many people, faith was not something separated from daily life. It surrounded everything. Marriage was therefore not merely a legal arrangement. It was also a religious commitment. The church taught people that marriage had duties. Husbands and wives owed obligations to one another. Sexual relations belonged within marriage. Adultery was sinful. Fornication was sinful. Marriage was connected with children and household order. These ideas were repeated through sermons, religious instruction, and community expectations. And yet, people remained human. Rules did not erase desire. They did not erase temptation. They did not prevent people from becoming attracted to someone they should not. They did not prevent married people from forming attachments outside marriage. They did not stop jealousy. They did not stop affairs. They did not stop secret meetings. They simply created consequences around those actions. Sometimes the consequences were religious, sometimes social, sometimes legal, and sometimes all three. Imagine a woman whose husband is away for several months. Perhaps he is working elsewhere. Perhaps he is serving in a military campaign. Perhaps he has traveled for business. She remains at home. Another man begins visiting. At first, they speak casually. Then, more often, the community notices. Nothing may happen. Or, something may happen. If an affair develops, the consequences could be severe. Adultery was condemned by the church. But again, the experience was not identical for everyone. Social status could affect how people were treated. Gender could affect how accusations were understood. Money could affect one's ability to defend oneself. The Tudor world was not a perfectly equal legal landscape, and this inequality is important when thinking about the romantic rules of the period. There was a strong expectation that women should be sexually modest. Girls were taught that chastity was valuable. Families wanted daughters to preserve their reputations. A young woman's future marriage prospects could depend upon how others viewed her character. This created pressure that could begin long before marriage. Imagine a girl growing up in a Tudor household. She learns how to manage domestic work. She may learn sewing, cooking, household management. Depending on her family, she may also learn reading and writing. If she is wealthy, her education may be broader. If she is poor, her education may be closely connected to work. From childhood, she hears messages about obedience, modesty, religion, and marriage. She understands that marriage will probably shape her adult life. She may dream about it. She may fear it. She may look forward to it. She may not have a clear idea of whom she will marry. And when someone eventually appears, the emotional experience can be powerful. Perhaps he speaks kindly. Perhaps he makes her laugh. Perhaps he brings a small gift. Perhaps he remembers something she said. Perhaps she begins to look for him whenever she enters a room. These small details of attraction are timeless. The social rules surrounding them are what changed. A gift could be innocent, but a gift could also become evidence of a relationship. A private meeting could be harmless, but it could also become the subject of gossip. A promise could be sincere, but if it were later denied, it might become a legal dispute. The same action could therefore have different meanings depending on context. This is why Tudor courtship cannot be reduced to a simple list of rules. It was a system of expectations, and people constantly moved within those expectations. Some followed them closely. Some bent them. Some ignored them. Some used them to protect themselves. Others were hurt by them. Now consider the role of gifts. People in the Tudor period gave one another tokens of affection. A small object could carry emotional meaning. A ring might symbolize commitment. A piece of jewelry could be significant. A letter could be treasured. Clothing or fabric could be given. But again, context mattered. A gift between friends was one thing. A gift exchanged during courtship could mean something else. A valuable gift could create expectations. Families might notice. The person receiving it might understand it as a sign of serious intention. And if the relationship ended, the meaning of the gift could change. The object remained. The promise did not. This is one of the quieter difficulties of courtship in a society where relationships were not always private. A young woman might hold a letter from someone she loves. She might keep it hidden. She might read it repeatedly. She might hope that one day they will marry. But if the family discovered the letter, the situation could change. A private feeling could suddenly become a family matter, and family matters could become negotiations. This is where the Tudor home becomes important. The household was not simply a place where people slept. It was the center of economic life. Work happened there. Children grew there. Food was prepared there. Clothing was produced and repaired there. Guests came there. Relatives visited. Servants lived there in many households. Apprentices could live there. The household was therefore a social world of its own. Privacy existed, but it was limited. A young couple could find moments alone. But they did not necessarily have the same expectation of personal space that many modern people have. The boundaries between family life and romantic life were different, and this made courtship complicated. A young man might need a reason to visit a woman's household. He could not always simply appear without explanation. His presence could be noticed. A family might welcome him, or they might not. A young woman might not have complete freedom to leave the house whenever she wished. Her movements could be shaped by work, family responsibilities, social expectations, and safety. The exact experience varied enormously by class. A wealthy young woman might live within a large household with servants and companions. A poor young woman might work outside her family home. A servant might have considerable contact with people beyond her household. There was no single Tudor woman. There were many, and their experiences of love could be very different. This becomes especially clear when we consider widows. A widow could occupy a different position from an unmarried young woman. She had already entered marriage. She might have experience managing a household. She might control property. Depending on the circumstances, she could continue a business. She could remarry, or she could choose not to. A widow with economic resources could sometimes enjoy more independence than a young unmarried woman. She might negotiate her own future. She might have children whose needs shaped her decisions. She might choose a second husband for affection, or for financial security, or for companionship, or for practical reasons. Again, love and economics could overlap. A second marriage could bring emotional comfort. It could also bring complications. A widow might have property from her first marriage. A new husband might gain rights or responsibilities connected to that property. Children from the first marriage might have interests that needed protection. The widow's choice could therefore become a family negotiation once again. The same patterns continued. Marriage connected people. It also connected resources. And wherever resources were involved, families paid attention. Yet beneath all these calculations, there was still the ordinary human desire to be loved. A widow could miss her first husband. A young man could long for a woman he hoped to marry. A married couple could develop deep affection. A person could feel lonely, even inside a busy household. These emotions rarely appear in official documents unless something went wrong. That creates a problem for historians. The records that survive often preserve conflict. They preserve court cases, disputes, property disagreements, accusations, marriage challenges, scandals. But a happy couple who lived together quietly for 40 years might leave almost no record of their emotional life. Their happiness did not require a court. Their affection did not require a legal document. Their ordinary evening disappeared into history. So when we study Tudor love, we have to imagine the silent majority whose lives were never recorded in detail. They married. They worked. They raised children. They grew old. They argued. They forgave one another. They shared meals. They sat near the fire. They went to church. They watched the seasons change. And sometimes they loved one another deeply. Perhaps that is why the Tudor past can feel unexpectedly gentle when we look closely. The world was harsh in many ways. Life expectancy was lower. Disease was common. Childbirth could be dangerous. Work was physically demanding. Poverty could be severe. But people still created small places of comfort. A warm fire, a shared meal, a familiar voice, a hand held in the darkness. A letter carefully folded and placed somewhere safe. A husband returning home. A wife waiting by the door. History is often written through great events, but human life is built from small ones. And love lives mostly in those small moments. As evening approaches again, the young couple from the beginning of our story are still uncertain about what comes next. Their feelings have not changed, but the world around them has begun to notice. The young woman's family is asking questions. The young man's family may be doing the same. Perhaps someone has already suggested that marriage should be discussed formally. Perhaps the two families will meet. There may be talk of money, talk of property, talk of the future. And perhaps the young couple will discover that wanting to marry is only the first step. Because in Tudor England, marriage did not begin when two people simply said they loved one another. It began when their intentions could be placed within the rules of family, church, law, and society. The fire in the household burns lower. The street outside is quiet. A horse moves somewhere in the darkness. The couple have one more night before the next conversation. Tomorrow, their private affection may become a public negotiation. And when that happens, they will discover one of the most important truths about Tudor love. Sometimes, the person you loved was not the only person you needed to convince. You might also need to convince your family. And that conversation is where our journey continues. The morning comes gently, just as it has before. A thin gray light enters through the small window, and the darkness slowly withdraws from the corners of the room. The fire has almost gone out. There is a little warmth left in the ashes, but soon someone will need to add more wood. Outside, the town is beginning its daily movement. A cart passes along the road. Someone calls to a neighbor. A church bell sounds in the distance. The young couple we have been following are awake again. Neither of them knows exactly what the coming day will bring. They have spoken about marriage. Their feelings are becoming known. And now the private part of their relationship is beginning to meet the wider world. For the young woman, this may begin with a conversation at home. Her mother may already suspect what is happening. Her father may have heard something. Perhaps a relative has mentioned the young man's visits. Perhaps someone has noticed the letters. Perhaps there is no gossip at all. Maybe the family has simply begun to understand. Sooner or later, however, the question must be asked. What does he intend? In the Tudor world, this could be one of the most important questions a young woman could hear. A man who wanted a serious relationship was expected to make his intentions clear. Courtship was not necessarily a casual experiment. Marriage was the destination that gave the relationship its social meaning. There could be affection without marriage, and of course, there could be attraction. There could be friendship. There could be sexual relationships outside marriage, despite religious teaching. But respectable courtship was expected to move toward a recognized union. That expectation created pressure on both people. If a man repeatedly visited a woman but refused to discuss marriage, her family might become suspicious. If he promised marriage and later withdrew, she might be left in a difficult position. If she became pregnant, the question of his responsibility could become urgent. And if he denied that he had ever promised anything, the matter could become a dispute. This is why a Tudor courtship could carry consequences long before the wedding itself. Imagine sitting quietly at the table while your parents ask about the man you have been seeing. You know that they are not asking simply because they are curious. They are trying to understand whether he can become part of the family. Your father may ask about his work. Your mother may ask about his family. Someone may ask where he lives. Someone may ask whether he has land. Someone may ask whether he has debts. Someone may ask whether he has a good reputation. You may want them to ask whether you love him. But that may not be the first question. In Tudor society, love had to coexist with survival. A household could not survive on promises alone. A man who wished to marry might need to demonstrate that he could support a wife. This did not mean that every Tudor family demanded wealth. People married across a wide range of economic circumstances. But the practical ability to establish a household mattered. A young man who was still an apprentice might have little control over his own finances. He could be years away from becoming an independent tradesman. Marriage might therefore have to wait. This was particularly important among urban craftsmen. Apprenticeships could last for years. A young man might live in his master's household. He would learn a trade. He would work long hours. He might eventually become a journeyman. Only later could he hope to establish himself independently. Marriage during this process was possible, but it could be difficult. The economic structure of the household shaped romantic choices. This is one reason why the image of every Tudor young person marrying almost immediately after reaching adolescence is misleading. The legal minimum age was low. But social and economic reality was different. Many people waited. They waited until they had work. They waited until they had resources. They waited until the right opportunity appeared. And sometimes they waited for years. Waiting could be part of courtship. A young couple might know that they wanted to marry, but understand that they could not do so yet. They might exchange letters. They might remain in contact through relatives. They might continue to see one another. And they might spend a long time wondering whether the promise would survive the waiting. This is where Tudor love could become strangely familiar. A modern couple might say, "We are not ready yet." A Tudor couple might feel something similar. The reasons were different. The pressures were different. But the uncertainty was human. What if circumstances change? What if the family changes its mind? What if someone else appears? What if the person I love becomes tired of waiting? What if I cannot provide the life I promised? These questions could keep people awake. And so, the quiet, emotional world of Tudor courtship was often filled with uncertainty. There was another complication: social class. Tudor England was a strongly hierarchical society. People were expected to understand their place. The boundaries were not completely fixed. People could rise socially. A merchant could become wealthy. A successful tradesman could gain status. A family could improve its position over generations. but differences still mattered. A wealthy family might object to a match with someone poor. A noble family might strongly oppose a marriage with someone considered socially inferior. A servant could fall in love with someone from a higher social position and discover that affection could not easily overcome the practical realities of their world. And yet, social boundaries were crossed. People did not always choose partners according to the expectations of society. This could produce conflict. Imagine a young noblewoman becoming attached to a man who has little property. Her family may see danger. They may fear that the marriage will weaken the family's position. They may worry about inheritance. They may wonder what others will say. She may see only the man himself. The family sees the consequences. Neither side necessarily believes that they are acting foolishly. They simply see different futures. This is one of the reasons family opposition could be so painful. It was not always a simple battle between love and cruelty. Parents could genuinely believe that they were protecting their children. A father might remember what happened to a relative who married badly. A mother might know how difficult life could become without financial security. They might think that affection fades, but poverty remains. Their advice could therefore be practical. The young person might hear only rejection. Both sides could feel misunderstood. This pattern was not unique to the Tudor period, but the social structure gave families significant influence. And for women, family expectations could be especially strong. A daughter was often expected to be obedient. The ideal of female obedience appeared repeatedly in religious and social teachings. A good daughter was expected to respect her parents. A good wife was expected to respect her husband. These ideals did not mean that every woman behaved obediently. They were ideals. Real people often argued with them. Women could resist. They could complain. They could negotiate. They could leave difficult situations in some circumstances. They could bring cases to courts. They could seek support from relatives. The distance between social ideals and actual behavior is one of the most important things to remember. A society can tell people how they should behave without guaranteeing that they will behave that way. The Tudor period is full of evidence of people breaking rules. If everyone had behaved perfectly, there would have been far fewer court cases. The very existence of disciplinary records shows that ordinary people did not always follow the expectations placed upon them. They met secretly. They had affairs. They broke promises. They became pregnant outside marriage. They married without full family approval. They argued with spouses. They separated from one another. They tried to find ways around restrictions. The rules were real. So was resistance to them. And nowhere was this more visible than in clandestine relationships. A young couple might know that their families would oppose the marriage. Perhaps they were determined to be together anyway. They could attempt to marry secretly. But secret marriage was not as simple as disappearing into another town. Church law and local custom created procedures. There were bans. There were marriage licenses. There were parish records. There were priests. There were witnesses. And although a clandestine marriage could sometimes be considered legally valid under the law of the period, it could still create serious problems. The church discouraged the practice. Families could challenge it. Disputes could follow. A couple might believe themselves married while relatives insisted otherwise. This could become especially difficult when property was involved. If a man died, was the woman truly his widow? Could she claim rights to property? Were their children legitimate? Was there evidence of marriage? These were not abstract questions. They could determine a person's future. And so a romantic decision made quietly could eventually become a matter of inheritance. Imagine a young woman standing in a church years later. She is older now. The man she married has died. His family says she was never truly his wife. She says they married years earlier. She remembers the words. Perhaps someone else remembers them too. Perhaps there is a witness. Perhaps there is no document. Now the emotional memory of a wedding becomes a legal question. Was it real? Did the marriage exist? What exactly was said? Who heard it? The past suddenly depends upon memory. This is why Tudor marriage records and church court records are so valuable to historians. They show us not only what the rules said, but what people did when the rules collided with real life. And real life was messy. There were misunderstandings. There were deliberate lies. There were sincere memories that contradicted one another. There were families trying to protect property. There were couples trying to protect their relationships. There were women trying to secure the promises they believed had been made. There were men trying to escape obligations they regretted. The church court sat in the middle of these disputes, but most courtships never reached a court. Most people simply married. They followed the expected process. They exchanged consent. They participated in the religious ceremony. They returned home. They began their married life. And then the real work began. Because one of the most important Tudor love rules was not about how to fall in love. It was about how to behave after marriage. Marriage created obligations. A husband had responsibilities toward his wife. A wife had responsibilities toward her husband. Both were expected to maintain the household. Both were expected to remain faithful. Both were expected to fulfill the duties of marriage. But the balance was not equal. The husband generally held greater formal authority. The wife was expected to obey her husband. This was deeply rooted in the patriarchal structure of Tudor society. Yet obedience did not mean that women simply became silent. A Tudor wife could manage a household with considerable skill. She could supervise servants. She could organize food. She could manage domestic production. She could help with business. She could raise children. In some families, especially among merchants, women played important economic roles. A household could depend upon the labor of both husband and wife. The formal hierarchy might place the husband above the wife. The practical reality could be more cooperative. A successful household required coordination. Imagine the early morning again. The husband leaves for work. The wife remains behind. But remaining behind does not mean doing nothing. There is bread to prepare, water to obtain, clothing to mend, children to care for, supplies to manage. Perhaps customers will arrive. Perhaps a servant needs instruction. Perhaps a business account needs attention. The household continues because someone keeps it moving. That someone may be the wife. The language of obedience can therefore hide the amount of responsibility women actually carried. The Tudor household was not simply a place where men commanded and women waited. It was a working institution, and women were central to its operation. Still, the legal structure could leave women vulnerable. Marriage could limit a married woman's independent control over property under common law principles. A married woman's legal identity could be significantly affected by coverture. Yet not every woman experienced this in exactly the same way. Property arrangements could vary. Equity and separate property could create exceptions. Widows had different legal positions. Women could own businesses under certain circumstances. Women could appear in records as active economic participants. The law was complicated. Life was even more complicated. This is another reason why simple descriptions of Tudor women can be misleading. They were not completely powerless, but neither were they equal to men. Their choices existed within limits. Some women had more room to negotiate than others. Money could create options. Family support could create options. Widowhood could create options. Social connections could create options. But an unmarried poor woman without family protection could have far fewer choices. This inequality becomes especially important when we return to courtship. The consequences of a failed relationship were not evenly distributed. A wealthy man might recover from a broken courtship. A wealthy woman might still have family support. But a poor woman who became pregnant outside marriage could face serious hardship. Her reputation could suffer. Her employment prospects could suffer. Her family might be angry. The child's future might be uncertain. And the father might refuse responsibility. The church could impose penalties. The community could judge her. Yet even here, there were mechanisms for seeking support. A woman could sometimes bring a claim against the alleged father. Church courts could hear cases involving sexual relationships and promises. The outcome depended on evidence. Witnesses mattered. Reputation mattered. The circumstances mattered. But the existence of these cases tells us something important. Women did not simply disappear from the story. They spoke. They made accusations. They defended themselves. They described relationships. They named men. They explained promises. Their testimony allows us to hear fragments of ordinary Tudor lives. Sometimes the language is formal because it appears in court records. But behind the formal language are real emotions. A woman who says that a man promised marriage may not be making a cold legal argument. She may be describing something that changed her entire life. Perhaps she believed him. Perhaps she loved him. Perhaps she expected to become his wife. Perhaps she now feels betrayed. The law sees a dispute. We can also see a broken heart. And this is where the quiet, emotional world of Tudor history becomes especially powerful. People centuries ago experienced disappointment just as deeply as people do now. They simply had different ways of expressing it. There was no modern language of dating, no idea of ghosting in the contemporary sense. But someone could still stop answering letters. A person could still disappear. A promise could still be broken. Someone could still realize that the person they loved had chosen someone else. The vocabulary changes. The feeling remains. Now imagine the young couple again. Their families have spoken. The young man's ability to support a household has been discussed. The young woman's family has considered his reputation. Perhaps they have decided that the match is acceptable. For the first time, the future seems possible. But there is still another question. What will they bring into the marriage? For many families, the answer involved property or money. A bride might bring a dowry. The precise nature and importance of dowries varied greatly by social class and circumstance. Among wealthy families, dowries could be substantial. Among ordinary people, the resources involved could be much smaller. But the principle was similar. Marriage changed the economic relationship between families. The husband's family might receive certain benefits. The bride's family might provide money, goods, clothing, household items, or property. The husband might be expected to provide for his wife. There could also be provisions for the wife's future if she became a widow. These arrangements could be negotiated before the wedding. And once again, romance was mixed with economics. A young woman might be deeply in love with a man. Her family might still ask what property will accompany the marriage. A young man might be deeply in love with a woman. His family might still ask whether the match is financially sensible. It can feel strange to modern eyes. But perhaps the strangest part is that the Tudor people themselves did not necessarily see this as a contradiction. Love and money could exist in the same conversation. Affection and property were not mutually exclusive. A person could sincerely love someone while also thinking carefully about financial security. In fact, financial security could be understood as part of love. Providing a stable household could be seen as an expression of responsibility. A husband who could support his wife was fulfilling an important social expectation. A family that secured a good match for a daughter could believe that it was acting out of care. The language of love was therefore broader than romance alone. It included duty, protection, companionship, responsibility, family, faith, and sometimes sacrifice. As the afternoon passes, the town grows warm. The streets become busier. People carry goods from one place to another. The smell of cooking food drifts from open doors. Somewhere, a hammer strikes metal. Somewhere else, children are playing. Life continues, and inside one household, a family is still discussing a marriage. Perhaps they have agreed. Perhaps they have not. The young couple wait. They know that their feelings alone cannot settle everything. But they also know something that their parents cannot fully control. They have chosen each other emotionally. That choice may not be enough, but it matters. This is the quiet tension that runs through Tudor courtship. The individual heart says one thing, the family may say another. The church provides its rules. The law provides another set of boundaries. The community watches, and the couple tries to find a path through all of it. Sometimes the path is smooth, sometimes it is not. Sometimes love fits neatly into the world around it. Sometimes love pushes against that world, and when it pushes hard enough, people begin to take risks. A secret meeting, a private promise, a hurried journey, a clandestine marriage, a letter sent without permission, a refusal to accept the marriage chosen by the family. These choices could change everything. And there is one particular kind of choice that can reveal just how serious the Tudor rules could become. The choice to marry without waiting for everyone else. As evening approaches, the young couple hear that their families have not completely agreed. There is still uncertainty. Someone wants more time. Someone wants better financial arrangements. Someone is concerned about reputation. Someone thinks another match might be better. The couple have spent days waiting. Now they must decide whether to wait longer. Outside, the light is fading. The road is becoming quiet. A bell sounds in the distance. Inside the house, the two people sit together for a moment. They do not know what tomorrow will bring, but they know that the next decision belongs, at least partly, to them. And tomorrow they may have to choose between obedience and independence, between waiting for approval and making their own promise, between the safe path their families have prepared and the uncertain path they have imagined together. The Tudor world has given them many rules. Now they are about to discover what happens when two people decide that their own feelings may be stronger than those rules. And with the last light disappearing beyond the rooftops, their quiet story moves toward the most delicate question of all. Can two people create a marriage simply because they have chosen one another? The answer, in Tudor England, is more complicated than it first appears. The answer begins with something surprisingly simple: consent. In the Tudor world, marriage was not supposed to exist merely because two families wanted it to exist. The people being married had to consent. This does not mean that Tudor society offered the same freedom of romantic choice that many people expect today. It did not. Parents could exert enormous pressure. Families could negotiate. Money could influence decisions. Social position could determine which matches were considered suitable. But at the heart of marriage was still the consent of the couple. And this is where our young couple find themselves in a strange position. Their families may hesitate. Their relatives may disagree. Yet if the two of them genuinely intend to marry, their own words may matter greatly. The room is quiet. The fire has been rebuilt. A small flame moves across the wood, casting a warm light against the walls. The young man looks toward the woman. Perhaps neither of them says very much. They already know what they want, but wanting something and making it official are not quite the same thing. The Tudor Church had rules. There were procedures. There were bans. There were licenses. There were expectations about where and how a marriage should be celebrated. Yet the legal history of marriage in England was complicated enough that a couple could sometimes create a valid marriage through their own consent, even without following every later formal requirement. This is one of the reasons clandestine marriages became such a difficult issue. A couple might exchange words privately. They might believe that they were now married. Their families might disagree. The church might disapprove of the way they had done it. But the existence of the marriage could still become a serious legal question. Imagine how confusing this could be. Two people say they are married. The parents say they are not. The priest says the proper procedure was not followed. A relative says the couple exchanged promises. Another person says they heard nothing. Years later, perhaps one of the spouses has died. Now the question is no longer simply romantic. It is about inheritance, property, widowhood, children, family rights. A few words spoken years earlier can suddenly become extremely important. This is why Tudor marriage cannot be understood simply by looking at wedding ceremonies. The deeper issue was consent. What did the couple say? When did they say it? What did they mean? Were they promising to marry later? Or were they declaring that they were married already? The distinction was subtle, but the consequences could be enormous. For a modern listener, it may sound almost unbelievable that a few spoken words could carry such weight. But in a society where formal written contracts were not always available to everyone, spoken agreements mattered. People depended on witnesses. They depended on reputation. They depended on memory. And sometimes they depended on the authority of the church courts to settle disputes. This meant that romance could leave a trail of evidence, a letter, a witness, a gift, a conversation, a public announcement, a statement made to a priest. The relationship might have begun in private, but pieces of it could eventually appear in public records. And that is one reason historians today can sometimes see ordinary Tudor relationships that would otherwise have disappeared completely. The people themselves never imagined that centuries later, someone might study their arguments. They were simply trying to solve problems. A woman wanted a man to acknowledge his promise. A man wanted to deny that he had made one. A family wanted to protect property. A couple wanted recognition. A widow wanted to establish her rights. The documents preserve the conflict. And through the conflict, we can glimpse the emotions underneath. The Tudor world, therefore, gives us an unusual window into love, not because people wrote romantic diaries every evening. Most did not. But because disagreements sometimes forced them to explain what had happened. And when people explained what had happened, they sometimes revealed what they felt. Now return to the young couple. Their families have been discussing the possibility of marriage. There is still hesitation. Perhaps the young man's financial position is not ideal. Perhaps his family wants a better match. Perhaps the woman's relatives worry that she will struggle. Yet the two of them have made their feelings clear. They are willing to wait. They are willing to negotiate. But they do not want to give each other up. This is where another Tudor custom becomes important: the engagement. Today, people often think of an engagement as a clear stage between dating and marriage. In Tudor England, the situation could be more complicated. There were different kinds of promises. A future promise could indicate an intention to marry, but it was not necessarily the same as an immediate marriage. A couple could therefore be deeply committed without yet being husband and wife. This period of waiting could allow families to make arrangements. Money could be discussed. Property could be settled. The wedding could be planned. The couple could continue their courtship. But the uncertainty remained. A promise was not always the end of the story. Sometimes it was only the beginning of a negotiation. And that is why the language people used mattered so much. A promise such as, "I will marry you," referred to the future. A declaration that two people were already husband and wife was different. The Tudor church courts could spend considerable effort determining which kind of promise had been made. The difference may seem small to us, but imagine building your entire future around one sentence. Then imagine discovering that another person remembers the sentence differently. That is the kind of uncertainty that could surround a disputed marriage. The young couple are lucky in one respect. They still have time. No court is involved. No accusation has been made. No child is involved. Their families are simply negotiating. They can wait. And waiting gives us an opportunity to step into another part of Tudor romantic life, the role of family gatherings. Courtship often happened in spaces where other people were present. A household could have visitors. Relatives could come and go. Neighbors might be welcomed. Young people could meet through these connections. This meant that romantic encounters were not always completely private. A young man might speak with a young woman while other people were nearby. They might walk together for a short distance. They might sit together during a gathering. They might find a quiet corner. The presence of others did not prevent affection. It simply changed the way affection was expressed. A glance could carry meaning. A small joke could become important. A hand might briefly touch another hand. A gift might be passed quietly. A letter could say what could not safely be said aloud. Human beings have always found ways to communicate affection. The Tudor period was no different, but the social environment shaped those methods. A modern couple may expect privacy. A Tudor couple often had to create privacy, and creating privacy could itself attract attention. That is one of the strange paradoxes of courtship. If you are always together in public, everyone can see you. If you try to meet privately, people may wonder why. So the couple had to navigate a narrow path, enough contact to build the relationship, not so much that the relationship became a public scandal. This was particularly important for women. A young woman's reputation could be fragile. A man who spent time with several women might be considered flirtatious. A woman who was seen with several men could face harsher judgment. The double standard was clear. The same behavior could produce different reputations, and reputations could affect marriage prospects. This did not mean that every Tudor woman lived in constant fear. People joked, they flirted, they teased one another, they formed friendships, they found ways to meet. But the consequences of being judged immoral could be serious. A woman might be called dishonest, promiscuous, untrustworthy. These judgments could make future marriage more difficult. For a man, the consequences might be less severe. This unequal burden was part of the larger patriarchal structure. The family line depended heavily upon the legitimacy of children, and female sexual behavior was therefore watched more closely. The concern was not simply morality, it was also inheritance. A child whose paternity was uncertain could create questions about property. For a noble family, those questions could be enormous. For ordinary families, they could still matter. So chastity was treated as a form of social protection. A respectable young woman was expected to preserve her virginity until marriage. A respectable young man was also expected to behave morally, according to Christian teaching. But the enforcement was unequal, and that inequality shaped romantic life. Now imagine a young woman who has been promised to someone. She knows that her family expects her to marry him, but she does not love him. Instead, she has fallen in love with another man. The second man may have little money. Perhaps his family is not important. Perhaps he has no property. Yet she feels safe with him. She enjoys his company. She imagines a life with him. What should she do? This is where Tudor romance could become painful. The modern instinct may be to say that she should simply choose the person she loves. But in her world, the consequences of that decision could be enormous. Her parents could refuse. Her family could withdraw financial support. Her reputation could suffer. The other man's ability to support her could be questioned. If she disobeyed, she might have to accept a less secure future. And if she obeyed, she might enter a marriage without the affection she wanted. There was no perfect answer. Some people chose obedience. Some chose resistance. Some waited. Some secretly married. Some gave up. And some discovered that circumstances changed. The man she loved might eventually become successful. The family might eventually approve. A different marriage might become impossible. Life could alter the choices. This is why Tudor history cannot be reduced to rules. Rules created the boundaries. People lived inside them, and living inside them required constant decisions. A young man might obey his father today and marry the woman he loves 5 years later. A young woman might accept her family's choice and eventually become fond of her husband. Another woman might resist completely. Another might marry secretly. There was no single Tudor pattern. As the afternoon light begins to fade, our young couple have reached another stage. Their families are now considering the practical arrangements. The young man's family asks what the bride will bring. The young woman's family asks what the groom can provide. There is talk of money, perhaps clothing, perhaps household goods, perhaps property, perhaps a future inheritance. The conversation is not romantic, yet it is part of their love story. Because the Tudor idea of marriage required a household to survive. A wedding was only one day. A marriage could last for decades. The family wants to know what happens after the celebration. Where will they live? How will they eat? Who will provide? What happens if children arrive? What happens if the husband dies? What happens if the wife becomes a widow? These questions are practical, but they also reveal something tender. People were trying to protect the future. Sometimes, practical arrangements were expressions of care. A father arranging property for his daughter might not speak romantically, but he could believe he was protecting her. A husband promising support might not use the language of modern affection, but providing for a household could be understood as part of marital love. In the Tudor world, love often spoke through responsibility. That does not make the emotional side less real. It simply gives it a different language. A husband may not write a long romantic message. Instead, he might make sure there's enough fuel for winter. A wife may not describe her feelings in modern terms. Instead, she may spend hours preparing food, caring for children, and managing the household. Affection could be expressed through work, through duty, through loyalty, through presence. And perhaps this is one of the quietest lessons of the period. Love is not always loud. Sometimes it is simply the person who continues to show up, the person who returns home, the person who remembers, the person who stays. For Tudor couples, staying mattered. Marriage was supposed to be permanent. There was no ordinary modern divorce. That made the decision to marry serious. But it also meant that once married, couples often had to find ways to live together even when life became difficult. Not every marriage was happy. Some were troubled. Some involved violence. Some involved abandonment. Some involved infidelity. Some couples lived separately, but the ideal remained permanence. The church expected marriage to endure, and this expectation could become difficult when affection disappeared. Imagine a woman who married at 20. 20 years later, she is 40. Her husband is no longer the person she once imagined. Perhaps he drinks heavily. Perhaps he is cruel. Perhaps he has another relationship. Perhaps they simply no longer care for one another. There is no simple legal process for ending the marriage and starting again. She may have very limited options. This is where the romantic rules of Tudor England can feel especially wrong today. The same system that treated marriage as sacred could also trap people inside unhappy relationships. The permanence of marriage could provide stability. It could also create suffering. Both realities existed, and we should not erase either one. The young couple at the center of our story have not yet reached that future. For them, marriage still feels hopeful. The arrangements are nearly complete. Their families are beginning to agree. There is still one final step: the public recognition, the banns, the church, the ceremony, the moment when private promises become a public marriage. They have spent so long wondering whether they will be allowed to marry. Now they are about to discover what the Tudor wedding itself was like. As evening falls, the household becomes quieter. The young woman prepares for sleep. Tomorrow she may hear the banns announced. Her name will be spoken publicly. The person she loves will no longer be only someone she visits. He will become her intended husband. The relationship that began with a glance, a conversation, and a promise is slowly becoming something recognized by the whole community. Outside, the wind moves gently along the street. The fire burns low. The town grows quiet. And for one more night, the young couple remain in the space between courtship and marriage. Tomorrow, the church will speak their names. And when those names are spoken, everyone will have an opportunity to listen. Because in Tudor England, even love could have a public announcement. The church is quiet this morning. The pale light of early day falls through the windows, and the stone walls hold the coolness of the night. Outside, the town is slowly waking. Inside, the young couple have reached the moment they have been waiting for. Their courtship has moved through questions, family discussions, promises, uncertainty, and practical arrangements. Now their intention to marry is no longer entirely private. Their names have been announced. The community has heard them. No legitimate objection has been raised, and soon they will stand together before the church. For them, this may feel like the end of a long journey. In another sense, it is only the beginning. Because the Tudor rules of love were never really about reaching the wedding day. They were about what came afterward. Marriage was expected to shape the rest of their lives. The church taught that it was a permanent union. Their families expected them to establish a household. Their community expected them to behave as husband and wife. And the couple themselves now have to learn what it means to live together. The ceremony may be short compared with everything that came before it. But the meaning attached to it is enormous. They have moved from being two people who hope to marry into two people recognized as husband and wife. The promises that once existed only between them now have a public and religious meaning. The people gathered around them are not simply watching a romantic celebration. They are witnessing the creation of a new household. And perhaps this is where the Tudor idea of love becomes clearest. Love was not expected to remain only a feeling. It was expected to become a duty, a household, a family, a shared life. The young woman is now entering a new stage. Her daily responsibilities may change. She may move into another household. She may begin managing a home of her own. She may work alongside her husband. She may have children. She may help with a family business. Her husband will also have responsibilities. He is expected to provide, to protect, to remain faithful, to manage the household, to fulfill the obligations of marriage. The language of the period often places the husband in a position of authority. The wife is expected to obey. This is one of the parts of Tudor marriage that feels especially distant today. Modern ideas about marriage often emphasize equality between partners. Tudor society was built around a different hierarchy. Men generally possessed greater formal authority. A married woman's legal position could be restricted by the doctrine of coverture under common law. Her legal independence could be reduced through marriage. Her husband generally held authority over the household. Yet the daily reality could be more complicated. A household was not maintained by one person alone. A wife could control many practical matters. She could supervise servants, manage food, organize household production, raise children, assist with trade, keep track of supplies, help run a business. And in some circumstances, women could be economically active in their own right. The formal hierarchy and the practical partnership could therefore exist at the same time. A Tudor husband might be regarded as the head of the household, but he could still depend heavily upon his wife's work. A successful marriage often required cooperation, whether or not the language of the period described it that way. And so, the couple begin their married life. The first evening may be ordinary. There may be food. There may be conversation. There may be tiredness. The excitement of the wedding disappears quickly. Tomorrow there will still be work. The fire will still need tending. Bread will still need making. Animals will still need feeding. Clothing will still need repairing. Bills will still need paying. The ordinary world returns. And perhaps that is the most realistic picture of Tudor love. Not endless romance, not dramatic declarations, but two people returning to ordinary life together. There is another important part of this life: children. For many Tudor couples, children were an expected part of marriage. Sexual relations were understood as belonging within marriage. Pregnancy was therefore closely connected to married life. But childbirth could be dangerous. Women faced significant risks. Medical knowledge was limited compared with modern standards. There were no modern antibiotics, no modern surgical facilities, no modern understanding of infection. Pregnancy and childbirth were part of everyday life, but they were not without fear. A Tudor woman could enter marriage knowing that motherhood might become one of the most important parts of her adult life. She might also know that pregnancy could bring danger. The emotional experience could be complicated. Joy, hope, fear, grief. A family might celebrate the arrival of a healthy child. They might also mourn a child who did not survive. Parents could lose children. Children could lose parents. Marriage therefore existed within a world where family life could change suddenly. This makes the small acts of affection between husbands and wives even more meaningful. A husband returning home was not simply returning from work. He was returning to a household that could be fragile. A wife caring for a child was not simply performing a social role. She was protecting a life in a world where illness could arrive unexpectedly. The Tudor family was built around practical survival, and love could become part of that survival. As the years pass, the young couple begin to settle into their household. The faces around them change, children grow, neighbors move away, new people arrive. The town changes slowly. The church remains. The fields remain. The seasons return. Winter comes. Spring follows. Summer arrives. Then autumn. The couple learn one another's habits. They discover what makes the other person laugh. They learn what causes irritation. They become familiar with silence. They learn how to disagree. They learn when to speak. They learn when not to. This is a part of marriage that historical records rarely describe. The gradual process of becoming comfortable with another person. The quiet companionship of years. A husband who knows how his wife takes her morning meal. A wife who knows when her husband has had a difficult day. A familiar voice in the next room. A hand reaching across the bed in darkness. These moments leave few records, yet they were part of Tudor marriage just as surely as weddings and court cases were. The past contains both. The rules and the emotions, the public and the private, the formal and the ordinary. And perhaps the most surprising thing is how often the two overlap. A marriage could be arranged for practical reasons and still become loving. A marriage chosen for love could become difficult. A widow could remarry for companionship. A young couple could resist their families and build a happy household. Another couple could obey every rule and still be miserable. No rule could guarantee happiness, and no social system could completely control the human heart. This is why the Tudor love rules can feel wrong today without making Tudor people themselves incomprehensible. Their society expected things from them that many modern people would reject. Family involvement could be overwhelming. Gender expectations were unequal. Sexual double standards were real. Women could have less legal independence after marriage. Marriage was difficult to end. Reputation could be harshly judged. Private relationships could become public matters. These realities should not be softened, but neither should we imagine Tudor people as strangers to affection. They loved, they worried, they hoped, they missed each other, they became jealous, they forgave, they sometimes stayed together for decades. They sometimes wished they had chosen differently. The human heart did not wait for modern society before learning how to attach itself to another person. As the years continue, the couple may become older. Their children may leave home. Their hair begins to change. Their hands become rougher from work. The town around them looks much the same, but they have changed. Perhaps one evening they sit beside the fire. The room is warm. Outside, rain taps softly against the roof. There is little need for conversation. They have spent so many years together that silence itself has become familiar. Perhaps the husband reaches for something near his wife. Perhaps she smiles. Nothing dramatic happens. No historian records the moment. But perhaps this is one of the deepest forms of Tudor love. Continuing, remaining, sharing the ordinary. The world around them has changed many times. Kings have died. Queens have ruled. Religious practices have changed. Wars have begun and ended. New ideas have traveled across Europe. But inside this small household, life has followed its own rhythm. A meal, a fire, a conversation, a night of sleep, another morning, another year. And eventually, one of them dies. This too was part of Tudor marriage. Death was never far away. A husband might die before his wife. A wife might die before her husband. Illness could change a family quickly. Widowhood could begin unexpectedly. And suddenly, all the practical arrangements surrounding marriage became important again. Who controls the property? What happens to the children? What does the widow receive? Who manages the household? Does the surviving spouse remarry? A widow might choose to remain single, but remarriage was common enough that it should not surprise us. A widow could need companionship. She might need economic security. She might have children to support. She might inherit or control resources. A widower might also remarry because running a household alone could be difficult. The second marriage could be based on affection or practicality. Often it was both. This reminds us once again that Tudor marriage was not a simple story of romance. It was a way of organizing life. And because life was difficult, marriage could provide essential support. Two people working together could survive more easily than one person alone. The emotional bond could become stronger because the practical bond was so important. When we look back at Tudor relationships today, it is tempting to focus only on the rules that seem strange. The public bans, the family negotiations, the unequal gender expectations, the importance of reputation, the difficulty of divorce, the legal significance of spoken promises, the involvement of the church. All of these can feel unfamiliar. But perhaps the deeper story is not about how strange Tudor love was. It is about how much of it was recognizable. People still wanted someone to come home to. They still wanted companionship. They still wanted children. They still hoped for loyalty. They still feared betrayal. They still worried about being rejected. They still waited for letters. They still remembered promises. They still wondered whether another person truly loved them. The rules changed. The feelings remained. And perhaps this is why the Tudor world continues to feel so close when we look at ordinary people rather than famous rulers. We can imagine a young woman waiting by a window, a young man walking along a muddy road, a father wondering whether his daughter's future is secure, a mother quietly preparing household things for a wedding, a couple sitting together after everyone else has gone to sleep. The objects are different. The clothes are different. The buildings are different. The language is different. But the emotions are surprisingly familiar. The young couple we followed at the beginning have now become part of the larger story. Their courtship began with uncertainty. Their families questioned the match. They considered money. They worried about reputation. They wondered whether their promises were enough. They waited, they negotiated, and eventually they married. Their story was never really extraordinary. and that is exactly why it matters. Most Tudor love stories were not royal. They did not involve palaces. They did not determine the fate of nations. They happened quietly. A man and a woman met. They became familiar. They began to care. They faced expectations. They made choices. They built a household. And life continued. There may have been happiness. There may have been disappointment. There may have been children. There may have been grief. There may have been moments when the marriage felt difficult. There may also have been evenings when simply sitting beside one another was enough. History cannot tell us every detail, but it gives us enough to understand the world around them. And perhaps, as the night settles over Tudor England once again, we can step back from the rules. The church bells have become quiet. The market is empty. The roads are dark. Inside the houses, candles burn low. Families are preparing for sleep. Somewhere, a married couple are speaking softly. Somewhere else, a young person is thinking about someone they hope to marry. Perhaps a letter is being folded. Perhaps a promise is being remembered. Perhaps someone is wondering whether tomorrow will bring good news. The world is quiet, and for a moment, centuries seem to disappear. The Tudor people are no longer distant figures in old portraits. They are simply human beings living inside the limits of their own time. They did not choose the society into which they were born. They inherited its religious beliefs, its family structures, its laws, its expectations, its inequalities. And within those boundaries, they tried to make lives for themselves. Some accepted the rules. Some challenged them. Some found ways around them. Some were hurt by them. Some found security in them. And some found genuine love inside them. That final point is worth remembering. The fact that a society had restrictive rules does not mean that the people living within it were incapable of happiness. Nor does happiness erase the restrictions. Both things can be true. A Tudor woman could love her husband deeply while still living under a system that gave her fewer legal rights than a man. A Tudor man could sincerely love his wife while still accepting a social structure that placed him above her. A couple could find comfort in marriage, even though leaving an unhappy marriage was extremely difficult. Human relationships often contain contradictions. History does not require us to choose only one side of them. We can understand the tenderness without romanticizing the inequality. We can recognize the restrictions without pretending that every marriage was miserable. We can acknowledge the rules while remembering the people. And perhaps that is the gentlest way to leave Tudor England. Not with a dramatic ending, but with the sound of ordinary life continuing. The fire settles into glowing embers. Rain moves softly across the roof. The wooden walls creak as the temperature falls. Someone closes a door. Someone whispers goodnight. The last candle in a nearby room is extinguished, and the Tudor town becomes still. Tomorrow, another morning will arrive. Someone will bake bread. Someone will open a shop. Someone will walk toward the fields. Someone will enter the church. Someone will receive a letter. Someone will begin a courtship. Someone else will prepare for a wedding. And somewhere, perhaps, two people will look at each other and feel the same quiet uncertainty that began our journey. They will wonder. They will hope. They will wait. Because although the rules of love have changed across the centuries, the desire to find another person and share the long journey of life has remained. The Tudor world is gone. Its houses have changed. Its roads have changed. Its churches have changed. Its laws have changed. Its ideas about marriage have changed. But the small human moments remain recognizable. A promise, a glance, a letter, a shared meal, a hand held quietly in the darkness, a person waiting for someone to come home. And perhaps, after all these centuries, that is the part of Tudor love that feels least strange. The rules belonged to their time. The heart did not. As the morning slowly arrives once more, the old Tudor town begins to wake. The darkness fades. The smoke rises. The bells begin. And another day begins, just as it did hundreds of years ago. People step into the streets. Families begin their work. Husbands and wives return to their ordinary routines. Young people look toward the future. And history continues quietly, carried not only by kings and queens, but by ordinary people who loved, married, waited, worked, hoped, and grew old. Their world may feel distant. Their rules may sometimes feel wrong to us, but their humanity is still there, quietly waiting for us to notice,